November 20th, 1943, Bidio Island, Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The first light of dawn breaks over a lagoon turned into a graveyard. Battleships Maryland and Colorado thunder in the distance, their 16-inch guns hurling steel into coral and sand. The bombardment, meant to annihilate Japanese defenses, instead churns the island into a smoking labyrinth. As the guns fall silent, Marines of the 2nd Division begin their advance. But the tide is too low, and their landing craft grind to a halt on the coral reef, 500 yards from shore. Men plunge into chest-deep water, burdened with rifles, packs, and demolition charges. Machine guns hidden in coconut log bunkers open fire, cutting the lagoon into fountains of blood. Amid the chaos, Staff Sergeant William Bordelon of the 18th Marines pushes forward, clutching his gear. Among it, an M1911A1 pistol, soaked in salt water but ready to fire. In these first terrible minutes of the Battle of Tarawa, America's faith in its weapons will be tested in blood. Across the shattered beach, Japanese defenders wait in silence. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki commands 4,500 men who have transformed this tiny island, barely 3 square miles, into a fortress of bunkers and tunnels. From the dark recesses of these pillboxes, Japanese machine guns bark, cutting down the Marines before they can reach dry ground. Their officers, armed with the Type 14 Nambu pistol, shout orders through the gun smoke. The Nambu, light and elegant in appearance, was the Imperial Army's pride. But beneath its blued steel lay fatal flaws. Weak ammunition, fragile mechanics, and a safety so awkward it could cost a man his life. In this killing field of sand and flame, the true test of engineering begins, a duel of industrial philosophies. For the Marines crawling through surf and shrapnel, survival depends not just on courage but on the reliability of steel. The M1911A1, America's standard-issue sidearm, is heavy, simple, and devastating. Firing a .45 ACP round, a 230-grain bullet moving at 830 feet per second, it delivers brutal stopping power. In the mud and heat of the Pacific, this pistol fires after immersion in seawater, after being dropped in sand, after hours of crawling under fire. Its mechanism, designed by John Moses Browning, was built to function where precision-machined weapons fail. The Type 14 Nambu, by contrast, fires an underpowered 8mm round, less than half the weight, with little ability to stop a charging enemy. In Tarawa's chaos, that difference becomes lethal. By mid-morning, Tarawa becomes a vision of hell. The lagoon is red with blood. Bodies drift between burning Amtraks and overturned landing craft. Yet still, the Marines advance, inch by inch, dragging wounded comrades through the surf. Bordelon, though wounded twice, crawls to a bunker, places his last demolition charge, and wipes out an enemy machine gun nest. As Japanese soldiers pour from side trenches, he draws his .45 and fires. Witnesses recall the sound. A single heavy bark amid the staccato chaos of rifles. The .45 slams each target backward. Its recoil is fierce but controlled. The Nambu's lighter round, by contrast, fails to penetrate even thick jackets or equipment belts. In close quarters, firepower decides who lives to see another minute. For every yard gained, dozens fall. Marine engineers report their pistols fouled with sand, yet still functional. The loose tolerances that target shooters once mocked now prove their worth. In contrast, captured Japanese sidearms jam after a few shots, their delicate safeties rusted, magazines warped by heat. A Time Life correspondent, embedded with the 2nd Division, records one haunting scene. A Japanese officer, wounded and frantic, tries to clear his jammed Nambu as Marines close in. He pulls the trigger again and again, nothing. Then a single shot from an American .45 ends it. The difference between mechanical reliability and failure becomes the difference between a warrior's last breath and another man's survival. By the battle's end, 1,700 Americans lie dead on a strip of sand barely long enough to land a plane. Every bunker, every trench has been taken by hand and often by pistol. Tarawa proves that, in modern warfare, personal weapons still matter. The M1911A1 is not just a tool of war, It is a statement of philosophy. Built for reliability under any condition, it reflects an industrial system that values function over ceremony, mass production over craftsmanship. The Type 14 Nambu, finely machined yet fragile, embodies Japan's pre-war illusion that courage and spirit could compensate for inferior steel. Tarawa shatters that illusion. In 3 days, an island becomes a laboratory for the mathematics of death, and the results are decisive. When the gunfire finally fades, the U.S. Navy reports the island secured. But beneath the statistics lies a deeper revelation. The performance of the M1911A1 has validated decades of American design philosophy, a weapon built not for elegance, but for survival. Its counterpart, the Type 14 Nambu, reveals the weakness of Japan's wartime industry. Poor materials, inadequate testing, and doctrines that valued tradition over practicality. As the Pacific War continues, from Tarawa to Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, these two pistols will meet again and again, each symbolizing the nation that forged it. In the hands of exhausted soldiers, their differences will be measured not in theory, but in blood. Long before the sands of Tarawa ran red, the story of America's most trusted sidearm began in another war, a colonial struggle half a world away. The year was 1899, and American troops found themselves deep in the jungles of the Philippines. Their enemy, the Moro-Germantados, fierce Muslim warriors who charged into battle with knives and religious fervor, often after binding their limbs to prevent blood loss. Armed with revolvers chambered in .38 long Colt, U.S. soldiers discovered, to their horror, that their sidearms lacked the power to stop the charging Moros. Even multiple hits to the chest failed to halt attackers before they reached American lines. This failure, documented in medical reports, would spark a revolution in small arms design and lead to the birth of the .45 caliber cartridge. The lessons of the Philippine-American War forced the U.S. Army to confront a harsh truth. Speed and accuracy meant nothing if a bullet could not stop an attacker instantly. In 1904, the Thompson-Lagarde tests were conducted, a scientific, if brutal, experiment to find the most effective handgun caliber. Conducted at the Union Stockyards in Chicago, the tests involved shooting live cattle and suspended human cadavers with various cartridges, from 7.65 mm Luger to .476 Ely. The results were unequivocal. Only large, heavy bullets created the immediate shock effect required for combat. The board's final report was blunt. No caliber smaller than .45 should ever be used for a military pistol. That single conclusion would guide American ordnance policy for decades. Enter John Moses Browning, a name that would become synonymous with mechanical genius. Working with Colt, Browning began developing a semi-automatic pistol design specifically for the new .45 caliber cartridge. His goal was simple yet revolutionary: a weapon that combined stopping power, reliability, and speed. By 1905, the prototype was ready, a heavy, short-recoil pistol firing a 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second. Browning's design introduced features unheard of in its day: a single-action trigger, a grip safety that prevented accidental discharge, and a detachable 7-round magazine. The weapon's behavior in field tests was astounding: accurate, powerful, and reliable under all conditions. What began as an engineering project was becoming an icon. Between 1906 and 1911, the Army tested dozens of designs from manufacturers across the world. Savage, Luger, Webley, and Colt among them. The final trials, held at Springfield Armory, were brutal. Pistols were fired continuously for thousands of rounds, dunked in mud, water, and sand, then expected to keep functioning. Browning's Colt pistol outlasted every competitor, firing over 6,000 rounds without a single malfunction. When the final report was delivered to the War Department, the recommendation was unanimous. The automatic pistol, caliber .45, model of 1911 should become the new sidearm of the United States Army. On March 29, 1911, the pistol was officially adopted, and a legend was born. Combat in the First World War would refine the pistol even further. In the trenches of France, soldiers discovered that small design changes could make life-saving differences. After 1918, the weapon was modified into the M1911A1, with a shorter trigger, a longer grip safety spur, wider sights, and a curved mainspring housing for better control. These improvements, though minor, reflected America's willingness to listen to its soldiers and adapt its tools for real combat. The .45 ACP cartridge itself remained unchanged, a subsonic round with massive stopping power, delivering 370 foot-pounds of energy. It was not a weapon of elegance but of certainty, one that did exactly what it was designed to do, every time. By the time America entered World War II, the M1911A1 was a mature weapon, its design perfected, its legend already growing. The pistol was powerful, simple to manufacture, and easy to maintain. Colt's Hartford factory produced as many as 800 pistols a day, but demand would soon exceed anything the company could meet alone. In a feat of industrial coordination unmatched in history, the U.S. Ordnance Department contracted other manufacturers, Remington Rand, Ithaca, Union Switch and Signal, and even Singer Sewing Machine Company, to mass-produce the pistol under strict standardization. Every part, from barrel to slide, was interchangeable between manufacturers. The result was an unprecedented triumph of design simplicity and industrial power. A pistol that could be built anywhere, repaired anywhere, and trusted everywhere. The M1911A1's creation was more than a story of engineering. It was a reflection of America's industrial philosophy. Every improvement was guided by field data, every decision tested by experience. It was a weapon born not from ideology but from necessity. As one ordnance officer later wrote, the .45 did not come from the drawing board, it came from blood, sweat, and mathematics. When the United States entered the Pacific War, it carried not just tanks and carriers, but the distilled wisdom of decades of combat and industry. And on the opposite side of that vast ocean, another nation, bound by pride, tradition, and isolation, was preparing to meet it with a pistol that symbolized everything America's did not. When the United States and Japan met in the Pacific, they brought with them not only different weapons but entirely different philosophies of design. The American M1911A1 represented function distilled to perfection. Rugged, simple, and devastatingly effective. The Japanese Type 14 Nambu, by contrast, embodied elegance, craftsmanship, and a tragic misunderstanding of modern war. Designed by Colonel Kajiro Nambu in 1926, the pistol was meant to symbolize Japan's growing industrial sophistication. Its smooth contours and compact frame resembled the European Lugers admired by Japanese officers. Yet beneath the surface, the Nambu suffered from chronic weaknesses, mechanical fragility, underpowered ammunition, and a safety system that required both hands to operate. In the crucible of Pacific combat, these flaws became fatal. The M1911A1 fired the .45 ACP cartridge, a 230-grain projectile traveling at 830 feet per second, delivering nearly 370 foot-pounds of energy. Its heavy subsonic bullet was designed for one purpose, to stop a human being instantly. The Type 14 Nambu fired the 8x22mm round, a 102-grain bullet at roughly 1,050 feet per second. Though faster, it carried only about 250 foot-pounds of energy, a third less power. In close combat, where shots were exchanged at distances measured in feet, this difference was not academic. It was life and death. American bullets crushed bone and muscle, often throwing enemy soldiers backward with sheer kinetic force. The Japanese round, lighter and faster, punched neat holes that often failed to incapacitate. The numbers told a brutal truth. Mass mattered. Mechanically, the two pistols could not have been more different. The M1911A1 used John Browning's short recoil system, a masterpiece of simplicity. The barrel and slide locked together on firing, recoiling briefly before unlocking to eject the spent casing. It was a design tolerant of dirt, water, and damage. The Nambu used a far more delicate floating locking block mechanism, requiring fine machining and clean conditions. Its recoil spring assembly depended on dual-nested springs that lost tension in tropical heat. The result was predictable, as temperatures and humidity soared in places like Guadalcanal or Peleliu. The Nambu's action began to bind, fail to return to battery, or refuse to extract. Marines found that even when caked in mud, the .45 would still fire. The Japanese pistol, when dirty, often became nothing more than a dead weight of steel. The problems were not confined to design. The placement of the safety lever on the Type 14, above the trigger guard on the left side, forced the shooter to break grip or use the support hand. In the chaos of combat, this was nearly impossible. Many Japanese officers carried their pistols with safeties off, creating their own dangers. Worse, the magazine release sat at the base of the grip and was prone to accidental activation, causing the magazine to fall free during movement. A late-war modification attempted to fix this with a stiff retention spring, but it only made reloading harder. Marines who captured Type 14s reported needing both hands to pull the magazines out. Meanwhile, the M1911A1's controls were designed around combat ergonomics. A thumb safety easily disengaged with the firing hand, a slide stop that locked open after the last round, and a release button that could be hit instinctively. Every movement was intuitive, every feature engineered for survival. Field conditions magnified these contrasts. In the steaming jungles and beaches of the Pacific, sand, salt, and heat became constant enemies of machinery. The M1911A1's deliberately loose tolerances, often criticized by target shooters for inaccuracy, became its greatest strength. Even when grit filled its frame, it cycled reliably. The Type 14, built with tight tolerances and hand-fitted parts, seized up when exposed to sand or mud. Its blued finish, ideal in Japan's temperate climate, corroded almost instantly in tropical air. By mid-war, Japanese arsenals had begun cutting corners to meet production demands. The deep bluing replaced by thin coatings, inspection marks reduced from 17 to 3, and parts interchangeability virtually non-existent. Where America's pistols became more refined as the war progressed, Japan's became cruder. Ammunition quality revealed the same story. The United States produced over 3.5 billion rounds of .45 ACP ammunition during the war, all manufactured to precise standards. Velocity variation rarely exceeded 25 feet per second, and primers were waterproofed for tropical service. Japan's wartime production, crippled by shortages, relied on inconsistent brass and unstable powders. Captured 8mm Nambu rounds often showed velocity fluctuations exceeding 200 feet per second. Misfires were common, and overcharged loads occasionally cracked pistol frames. By 1944, Japanese officers were ordered to conserve ammunition, sometimes carrying as few as 20 rounds into entire campaigns. The result was a weapon that could neither be trusted nor effectively supplied. Doctrine reflected culture. American officers and NCOs viewed their pistols as essential battlefield tools, secondary weapons for when rifles failed or distances closed. Marines trained extensively with the .45, practicing rapid-fire drills, malfunction clearances, and point shooting. Japanese officers, required to purchase their own pistols, often treated them as symbols of rank rather than weapons. Some even carried European pistols or ceremonial swords instead. Training ammunition was scarce. Many officers entered combat having fired fewer than 50 rounds in their lives. The Imperial Army's manuals devoted more space to swordsmanship than marksmanship. Against American forces who trained to draw, fire, and reload instinctively, this disparity proved disastrous. When theory met practice, the outcome was inevitable. Marines in the field learned to trust their sidearms implicitly. Reports from Guadalcanal and Tarawa described men firing pistols underwater, through clothing, or after crawling through sand, and the weapons still worked. Captured Type 14s, on the other hand, were regarded as trophies, not tools. A Marine Corps weapons report from 1944 summarized the matter succinctly. The Japanese pistol is of poor manufacture and weak design. It cannot be relied upon in combat. For all its elegance, the Nambu was never meant for war. The M1911A1 was. By the time the war turned toward Japan's home islands, the verdict was clear. The M1911A1 had become more than a sidearm. It was a symbol of American engineering philosophy. Simplicity, power, and reliability under fire. The Type 14 Nambu had become the opposite, a monument to misplaced pride, intricate design serving outdated doctrine. In the Pacific's unforgiving climate, where even rifles jammed and men fought at arm's length in caves, the heavy bark of the .45 became a sound of survival. As one Marine put it after Okinawa, if the .45 didn't stop them, nothing would. In modern war, the strength of a weapon is not measured only by its performance in battle, but by the industry that sustains it. When America went to war in 1941, its factories transformed almost overnight into an arsenal of democracy. The M1911A1 pistol became a symbol of that transformation. Colt's Hartford factory, once the sole producer, could no longer meet demand. The U.S. Ordnance Department turned to unexpected partners. Remington Rand, a typewriter company, Ithaca, a shotgun manufacturer, Union Switch and Signal, a railroad equipment builder, and even Singer, the sewing machine giant. Each received blueprints, jigs, and inspection gauges designed for total interchangeability. Within months, these companies were producing hundreds of pistols a day, each part capable of fitting perfectly into any other pistol, regardless of origin. It was manufacturing unity on a scale the world had never seen. At Remington Rand's Syracuse plant, pistols rolled off the line in numbers unthinkable just years before. More than 877,000 units by the end of the war. Their engineers pioneered methods like automated checkering of grip frames, broach rifling barrels in a single pass, and statistical process control to ensure uniform tolerances. Ithaca Gun Company introduced investment casting for small parts, reducing machining time by 60%. Union Switch and Signal employed railroad metallurgical techniques to improve heat treatment and extend barrel life by a third. Singer, though producing only 500 pistols, created the precision tooling later used by others. Each improvement built on the last, creating an industrial ecosystem that turned civilian expertise into military power. It was not just the gun that mattered, it was the process. Across the Pacific, Japan struggled to keep pace. The Type 14 Nambu was produced by a network of arsenals, Kokura, Nagoya, and Torimatsu among them, each using different materials and methods. Where American factories worked to common standards, Japanese production relied on hand-fitting and inspection stamps. Interchangeability was nearly non-existent. Parts from one pistol often wouldn't fit another, even from the same factory. As bombing campaigns intensified, Japan's access to quality steel, copper, and chemicals dwindled. Pistols were made from recycled ship armor and salvaged brass. Heat treatment became inconsistent, resulting in soft frames and brittle barrels. Quality collapsed. By 1944, the polished finish of early models gave way to rough tool marks and misaligned parts. The result was a weapon that degraded faster than the soldiers who carried it. Ammunition told the same story of contrast. America's Frankfurt Arsenal and private contractors like Winchester and Remington Arms produced over 3.5 billion rounds of .45 ACP during the war. Each lot was tested for pressure, velocity, and accuracy before shipment. Brass was drawn in 3 stages, annealed, and sealed for corrosion resistance. Waterproof primers allowed ammunition to survive months in tropical storage. Japan's 8mm Nambu production, by comparison, barely exceeded 100 million rounds from 1926 to 1945. By 1944, shortages forced arsenals to use impure brass and unstable powder blends. Ammunition tested by U.S. Ordnance on captured stockpiles revealed misfire rates of 30% and velocity variations of over 300 feet per second, fatal flaws in combat. Ammunition that could not be trusted rendered the weapon worthless. But no factory or statistic could replicate the brutal test of the Pacific battlefield. The environment itself became the ultimate judge. On Guadalcanal, humidity reached 100%. Weapons rusted overnight and ammunition swelled in its boxes. Leather holsters rotted within weeks, forcing Marines to carry their pistols tucked into belts. Yet the M1911A1 kept firing. Marines used engine oil, coconut oil, even seawater to clean and lubricate their pistols. Sergeant Thomas Morrison, an armorer with the 1st Marine Division, wrote in his field notes, "They look like hell, but they still work. The Japanese pistols rust solid in 3 days. The .45's parkerized finish absorbed oil, its loose tolerances ignored grit, and its single recoil spring continued to function even after corrosion set in. On islands like Peleliu and Iwo Jima, the punishment grew worse. coral dust and volcanic ash infiltrated every mechanism. Heat reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the open. Ammunition grew so hot it burned to the touch. Yet reports from the field remained consistent. The M1911A1 continued to function. Marines described firing hundreds of rounds in extreme heat, then dunking their weapons into canteens or puddles to cool them, and they still worked. Japanese pistols, exposed to the same environment, often jammed after a handful of shots. Soldiers hammered their magazines against rocks in vain attempts to reload. The difference was mechanical humility, a design built for reality, not for ceremony. The opposite extreme came in the Aleutian Islands campaign of 1943. There, temperatures dropped below freezing, and coastal winds reached 100 miles per hour. Lubricants froze into tar. Weapons seized in seconds. Soldiers learned to run their M1911A1s dry, no oil at all, and the pistol still functioned. The Type 14, dependent on lubrication, froze solid. Japanese soldiers attempted to warm their weapons under coats or near fires, but condensation froze instantly, locking slides and triggers. A weapon that could not fire in the cold or the heat was no weapon at all. The .45 had proven itself in every climate known to man. By 1945, the M1911A1 had evolved from a sidearm into an emblem of trust. Marines called it their last word, the weapon they turned to when rifles jammed and enemies came from the dark. On Okinawa, cave warfare forced close-quarters fighting where pistols were the only option. Marines entered tunnels with flashlights taped to their pistols, clearing one chamber at a time. Inside those suffocating spaces, the .45's subsonic round produced a deep, concussive thud rather than the deafening crack of faster bullets, a crucial advantage underground. In those tunnels, it was not doctrine or technology that mattered most, but the simple, unrelenting fact that one pistol fired every time its trigger was pulled, and the other did not. As the war neared its end, the numbers told the story of an industrial gulf that could not be crossed. Between 1941 and 1945, American factories produced 1.87 million M1911A1 pistols, all interchangeable, all tested. Japan, after 2 decades of production, had built barely 400,000 Type 14s. The ratio in ammunition was even starker, 35-1. These figures were not mere statistics, they were reflections of national capacity. America's strength lay in its ability to turn design into reality, theory into mass production. Japan's weakness was the belief that spirit alone could compensate for inferior machines. In the Pacific, that belief was buried alongside its empire. By the spring of 1945, the Pacific War had become a war of attrition fought at arm's length. On Okinawa, the last great battle before Japan's surrender, over 180,000 American troops confronted 110,000 defenders dug into caves and ridges. The campaign would last 82 days, a grinding struggle of mud, monsoon, and madness. In this inferno, the M1911A1 pistol proved itself once more as the weapon of last resort and first reliability. When rifles jammed with mud and carbines ran dry, Marines reached for their .45s. Sergeant Belford Anderson of the 96th Infantry Division, later awarded the Medal of Honor, recalled using his pistol against Japanese soldiers emerging from hidden tunnels. "When they came up right under you," he said, "there was no time to swing a rifle. The .45 knocked them down instantly." In the labyrinth of Okinawa's caves, warfare descended into its most primitive form. Soldiers and Marines advanced by inches, clearing chambers with grenades, flamethrowers, and pistols. The .45 ACP cartridge, heavy and subsonic, proved perfect for confined spaces. It struck with crushing momentum but without the ear-shattering crack of faster rounds. Marines taped flashlights to their pistols, moving through tunnels filled with sulfur fumes and the stench of death. "You'd see movement," recalled Corporal Donald His, "and fire. The .45 would blow them backward into the walls." These were not battles of ideology, but of survival, fought in darkness where reliability and power meant everything. Inside those tunnels, engineering became destiny. The Japanese fought with courage but without tools to match. Ammunition shortages were so severe that many officers carried fewer than 20 rounds. Documents captured from the 62nd Division recorded that even senior officers shared single pistols among multiple men. Many Type 14s no longer functioned, their magazines frozen with rust, safeties jammed, or springs broken. Colonel Hiramaki Yahara, operations officer of the Japanese 32nd Army, later wrote, "Our pistols had become almost useless. American soldiers carried weapons that worked in any weather with ammunition that never failed." For Japan, the Type 14 had become an emblem of futility, an elegant artifact in a war ruled by industrial reality. Even after victory, the U.S. military sought to understand what had made its weapons so dominant. Tests conducted at Aberdeen Proving Ground compared captured Type 14 pistols to standard-issue M1911A1s. The results were stark. The .45 ACP retained nearly 90% of its muzzle energy at 50 yards, while the 8mm Nambu fell below 70%. The larger bullet's frontal area, .451 inches versus .320, displaced almost twice the tissue, creating wound channels over 4 inches in diameter. In gelatin and cadaver studies, the .45 consistently incapacitated targets with 1 or 2 hits, while the 8mm Nambu required multiple direct strikes. The numbers confirmed what Marines already knew. In close combat, energy and momentum outweighed precision and speed. The science of stopping power had spoken. The post-war years brought reflection on more than mechanics. For American commanders, the .45 was proof that industrial democracy could outproduce and outthink authoritarian militarism. The M1911A1's mass production was not merely efficient, it was egalitarian. Every Marine, from officer to private, carried the same weapon built to the same standard. In contrast, Japan's feudal procurement system required officers to buy their sidearms, ensuring inequality in both quality and availability. The result was a stark metaphor. A nation built on mass cooperation defeating one built on hierarchy. Where Japan's weapons served as a badge of rank, America's served as an instrument of survival. The final months of the war turned Okinawa into a preview of apocalypse. The island's coral ridges became rivers of mud under the monsoon. Foxholes filled with water, and weapons were submerged daily. The M1911A1's drainage channels and loose tolerances allowed it to function even when soaked. Marines kept their pistols inside their shirts to keep them dry, using body heat to prevent rust. The Type 14, with its tight internal tolerances and wooden grips, swelled and locked solid. Japanese ammunition deteriorated to the point where 30% of cartridges misfired. For the Americans, resupply was constant. For the Japanese, failure was inevitable. The difference between the two nations could be summed up not in speeches, but in statistics, and in the metallic click of a weapon that worked every single time. When the guns finally fell silent, the numbers told a story beyond victory. American forces had produced 1.87 million M1911A1 pistols during the war, more than 4 times Japan's entire Type 14 output over 2 decades. Ammunition ratios were even more staggering. America manufactured 3.5 billion .45 ACP rounds to Japan's 100 million 8mm Nambu. Every American pistol underwent proof testing with overcharged cartridges. Every 10th was endurance tested to 5,000 rounds. Japan, crippled by shortages, had abandoned inspection entirely by 1945. The result was an equation with no mystery. Reliability plus firepower equaled survival. The Pacific's brutal arithmetic was unforgiving, and America had done the math. After the war, the U.S. military continued to carry the M1911A1 through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Decades later, elite special operations units still trusted it. The Japanese Type 14, by contrast, disappeared from service the moment the war ended. Japan's new self-defense forces adopted foreign pistols, never again attempting to design one of their own. Yet the legacy of these weapons extended far beyond ballistics. The M1911A1 came to symbolize the power of disciplined innovation, a machine that embodied the virtues of adaptability, precision, and practicality. It proved that technology guided by feedback and refined by experience could become an enduring instrument of victory. Historians often say wars are won by logistics, But on the individual level, wars are survived by reliability. The M1911A1, forged from steel and mathematics, was more than a firearm. It was the handshake between engineering and human endurance. Its counterpart, the Type 14 Nambu, serves as a cautionary tale that courage and tradition cannot compensate for flawed design. From the coral sands of Tarawa to the volcanic caves of Iwo Jima, from the frozen Aleutians to the mud of Okinawa, one truth remained constant. A weapon that fired when needed most could decide the fate of nations. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz would later summarize the lesson of the Pacific War. Our technology, including the superiority of individual weapons like the .45 automatic, gave our Marines and soldiers decisive advantages in close combat. When battles came down to single men at close quarters, our weapons made the difference. In that statement lies the essence of America's triumph. Victory was not born of chance, but of precision, of engineers who listened to soldiers, factories that built to last, and a weapon that turned mathematics into survival. The thunder of the .45 echoed across every island from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay. In the end, it was more than a pistol. It was proof that industrial democracy could outfight empire.